Welcome everyone to another episode of Power Core Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Javon Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today, we're going to be continuing What If Deku Was a Power Ranger? Heroes of the Morphing Grid, Part 12. Can't believe we've actually hit Part 12 at this point. After this, again, if you guys want to go over the Meta Liberation arc, then I can do that. That's basically the Villain Academia portion of season 5. Again, we don't have to go over that, but if you want me to, then I will. But after that part, we're basically done until season 6 of next year. I mean, of course, I could go into the manga and basically continue on the series, but I think that out of respect, I'm just gonna wait for the anime to come out. So basically, this series is going to be coming to a brief hiatus rather quickly. Now, there is going to be a certain hero team-up special that is going to be occurring at the end of this version of Season 5, and will tie in everything that we do together, but that's for more information that'll be coming down in the near future. But before we get into today's video, as always, if you like this and more on the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Also, stay tuned for everything else that we're going to be having on the channel coming out this week, including more stories and maybe a few what if one-shots if you're down for that as well, and even some discussion and theory videos. You know, we dive in and give our own thoughts and opinions on different things. But anyway, without further ado, we're going to get into today's video. So as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Following New Year's, as all of the students in UA had been given time to go spend with their family, it was soon time to begin the work studies as the new year rolled in. The Hero Public Safety Committee had instituted for the continuation of the work studies program, as they wanted to have all of the students at UA, as well as other Hero schools, trained and ready in case of another incident following the Deku City incident, not knowing when or if the League of Villains would attack again, as well as the unknown whereabouts of Rita Repulsa and other outside threats. Many of the other Rangers had already decided where they were going to go, but among them, their three best, Izuku, Todoroki, and Bakugo, had already decided that they were going to go back to Endeavor once again. They had trained with him after the events of the sports festival a long time ago, although this time around Gran Torino wouldn't be there. Their seventh member, Melissa, along with Alpha 5, were going to be going to Eye Island for their work studies, along with All Might. All Might had promised that he would look after Melissa in her training, as far as in her ranger abilities, as well as with her quirk. Also, Melissa wanted to discuss things with Saba, her sword that she had acquired when she unlocked the White Tiger powers. And they also wanted to do some more looking into when it came to the ranger tech, wanting to upgrade it in different ways, and her father on Eye Island would have the right idea for them to do so. Although before leaving, everyone would get their own risk communicators so that they could keep in contact, and the Rangers of Class 1B would have them as well. Before leaving, Mr. Aizawa would warn all of them not to use their Zords in the meantime, as they didn't have express permission to use it in their hero work, but their Ranger powers and their quirks would all be fine, since they have their provisional license. With that, everyone would bid each other farewell as they all set off to go about in their hero training. After saying goodbye to his mother, Izuku would head out along with Bakugo and Todoroki, where they would meet with Endeavor at the Endeavor Agency, the new #1 hero. While Endeavor wasn't completely on board with training Izuku and Bakugo, he couldn't deny that they all had talent from when they first trained together. And they were also Rangers, just like his son, so he knew that they were going to be a package deal one way or another. And all of their quirks were kind of connected in a sense, at least when it came to the more fiery side of their abilities. Bakugo with his explosions, and Shoto with his half hot, half cold, and even Izuku with his burning green flame, which, outside of a color change, was effectively his own quirk in a sense, although there were a few other things that he could do with his that even Endeavor couldn't do at the moment, but that was probably just the benefactor of quirk evolution, as that was something that came about from time to time. Meanwhile, the #3 hero, now going into #2, following the retirement of All Might, Hawks, had gone off to the Gunna Mountain Villa, where he had gone off to get some coffee. After arriving at his designated spot, he would meet with another hero, the Slide and Go hero, who would reprimand him for being late, and for telling him that he shouldn't go about too many places without permission. He began to brag, talking about how he outranked him, Hawks not really paying Slide and Go much mind as he tried to enjoy his coffee. However, Slide and Go wouldn't have too long to speak, as soon another man in the shadows, would speak up and chime in, putting him back in his place, and telling him just bluntly that he was a low-ranking hero in the grand scheme of things, and that Hawk's status as the #2 hero was vastly more resourceful, and that in the end, Slide and Go could only give them surface information at best. The hooded figure also revealed that he had had his own way of keeping an eye on Hawks, even breaking down as far as how he had gone in to get a different coffee, to which Hawks would simply reply that he liked his coffee sweet, although he knew fully well what this hooded figure, known as Skeptic, was truly referring to, as micro devices had been placed on Hawk's wings to monitor the hero's activities all around, even having himself monitored in the process. In the meantime, Endeavor, along with his 3 charges, were walking through the city streets. He looked back at Izuku, reminded of their interaction during the sports festival, thinking of just how much things had changed, and remembering how even Izuku once noted that Shoto was nothing like him. Suddenly, though, without warning, Endeavor would run off immediately, telling the others that if they were going to learn anything, then they should learn by merely watching him and to not get in his way, as he could hear a disturbance. Although, as if on cue, the 3 boys would reach down to their buckles, pulling out their morphers as they morphed into action, joining Endeavor soon behind, as they went to see where the threat was coming from. They would head out to the middle of the city, where they would see glass, all of it starting to be manipulated, as if it was all being gathered together by one person. Up abroad, Hawks would look from the rooftops, as he was reading from the book, The Meta Liberation War, and giving his own comments of the terrible timing. The 3 students would try to keep up with Endeavor, ready for action, but they would come to see just the full might of Endeavor. Even with all the power that they had, he far exceeded them, as he used his flash fire technique to counter the ever-growing glass bubble. As they made their way to the business district, they would come face to face with the villain and the ever-known eccentric Star Servant, who would continue on in his speech about the end of the world as he would float through the streets on his glass bubbles. The citizens would have seen him as more of a nuisance than a threat, although now he seemed to be taking his antics a bit too far. He would begin to try to congeal all of the glass that he could, from the windows and from the car shields, attempting to create a giant bubble of glass that would be completely melted away by Endeavor. In his fleeing attempts, he would try to escape, using a few of his underlings to help him and set a trap for Endeavor, although it wouldn't go how he thought it would, as his underlings were about to be taken out by the three Rangers, although before they could even get a chance to land the strike, Hawk's feathers would swoop in far too quickly, taking them out in the process, as Endeavor would arrive and tie up the would-be religious cultists. Before being taken away, though, he would yell out about the end times and how they would all be brought about by Endeavor and his flames, the enlightened king, the one who would hurl the end of them all. After Endeavor had finished talking to the police, he would turn to Hawks and ask him why he had come out of nowhere, telling him that if he wanted to show up, he should have called him first. But Hawks would remark that he was just flying by, and that in the meantime, he would deflect Endeavor's questions by asking him more of his own, promoting a book that he was carrying called the Meta-Liberation War Book. Outwardly, Endeavor could tell that Hawks wasn't acting like his regular self. Through his words, Endeavor would understand that Hawks was trying to tell him something, without revealing too much, most likely under surveillance of some kind. He would simply play along and act as if nothing were going on at all. While the other students were there, they would be completely clueless of the situation, Izuku in awe of meeting the number 2 hero, Shoto being respectful, but Bakugo really didn't care all too much. Hawks would continue to play up his front, giving them all books as well and sharing in what he called the good news, before eventually flying away. He could only hope that Endeavor had actually figured out what he meant, and he hoped that in the end they would find the secret to his message. While everyone else was watching as Hawks flew off, Endeavor would lead the way as they went back to his head agency building. Once inside, Endeavor would lock himself in his office as he would begin to read the book, while the 3 young heroes would meet with many of other Endeavor's sidekicks, including Burnin, who would explain how the agency worked, and about how they would get different calls, and about many of the other missions that they went on. They were happy to see them again, as they recognized them from when they had come around the first time, long ago, and they were happy to see how much things had changed, referring to their exploits, especially when they were on the news when they backed up All Might going up against All for One. But in the meantime, though, Endeavor would stay to himself, as he began to read over the highlight sections of the book. In his office, Endeavor would realize that more was off about Hawks than he was originally suspecting. Once he was able to encrypt and read through the message that had been given, he started to realize specifically what Hawks was trying to tell him. Endeavor slowly deciphered the clues as he figured out what Hawks' message was, warning of the threat of the Paranormal Liberation Front and their plans to attack within the next 4 months. Remembering the conversation he had had with the Public Safety Commission president, who had asked him to help in the students to gain experience fighting villains, Endeavor finally understood what he needed to do. After giving a brief instruction along with a few of his other sidekicks, Endeavor knew that he couldn't afford to only train his son, but that the others needed to be trained as well. Eventually, he would gather them all in his gym, where he would break down what they were going to be going over during their work studies, knowing full well that all 3 of them were going to have to reach their full potential if they were going to be ready for the fights that were to come. He knew that he only had 4 months to train them, and that Hawks in the meanwhile would have to do what he could, serving as an undercover agent for the Paranormal Liberation Front, pretending to play both sides of the organizations. Of course, Hawks had been specifically assigned to this mission, as this was what he was best known for. He was good at putting up a false front, and he knew better than to overplay his hand. Although he was never 100% sure who was or wasn't aware, Hawks would try to pick up on anything that he could in the meantime, always fully aware that the Liberation Front, as well as the League of Villains, would be watching his every move. Most specifically Dabi, who he still felt didn't completely have his trust yet. Although it seemed as though everyone else was on board, and he seemed to be playing his hand rather well in the meantime, as he would meet with the leader, Redestro, who would congratulate him on his work. Hawks, in the meantime, before leaving, would leave one of his feathers behind, using it as a way to pick up the sounds of the conversations and to learn about any other information that he could before passing it along to the other heroes as well, as the whereabouts of Tomura Shigaraki had been unknown for some time, although deep down he was, in his own way, gaining a new sort of power. He had come to work with a specific doctor, one who was pretty efficient when it came to various forms of quirk technology. But he had gathered some other scientists as well with the data that he had gotten from a broken morpher that he had received from Rita Repulsa during their attack against All Might, which ended in abrupt failure. Shigaraki had wanted to discover the new and unboding power that was within. So much so that he had undergone several different experiments, hoping to get closer to whatever this morphing gid was. The doctor who he was working with in the meantime would tell him that he needed to be careful with dealing with this strange power. Not knowing what it was or what it could do, there was no telling just what dangers it would be putting him in the meantime. But Shigaraki would merely ignore the doctor's warnings as he would continue on with the experiment, as he would gain a mastery over whatever this power was, and he would make it for himself. Back with the 3 other heroes, they would begin their work studies in earnest, all of them looking for a different way to improve in their aspects in power. For Todoroki, he wanted to try to gain a mastery over using both his hot and his cold side at the same time. As for Bakugo, he wanted to make the most out of his explosions and to not waste energy unnecessarily. But for Izuku, he had 2 different areas that he wanted to focus on, but he wasn't sure which way to go. On one side, he wanted to get a better mastery over his flames that he had since he had been for a few years now. Of course, he was pretty adept at using his flame quirk, but he knew that there were still better ways that he could use it as a whole, and as such, he took a lot of his moves and inspiration from Endeavor, actually, seeing how he controlled them. Of course, he had the tendency to follow behind All Might as well. But there was also Black Whip. He wanted to get a mastery over that one as well, but the power output was way too large. Endeavor would warn that when using that much power, it required an extreme mastery over it, and that he was going to have to be able to be focused on outputting the power and in its overall source all at the same time, just as he did with his flames, being rather precise and precision when it came to using his power, something that he merely had to learn how to do through years of training. He likened it to that of driving a car. There are many different motions and moves that go into doing so, but Eventually, you get to a point where you can drive a car and perform many of the other intricacies inside of it effortlessly, as if it's second nature. That was what he needed to do when it came to his quirks, if he ultimately wanted to achieve his goals. He would take out the young students out for patrol, and as he did so, they would get to see how the number one hero moved in action. They would see how fast he was able to intercept various threats before they took place, and he would not show any mercy in how he critiqued them. A few times though, Bakugo would complain that he could have done better if he had just gotten a chance to build up more power. However, Endeavor would quickly warn him of a cold truth, that in a life or death situation, one does not simply get to complain about what they could or couldn't do, or what they did and didn't have. But in the end, you had to be fully accountable at all times, and had to be ready for any emergency, as that was the life of a hero, always being prepared for the unexpected. The others would take that to heart as they began their training, all of them trying to improve and get better in their own way, and it was slowly draining them over time. Meanwhile, with Shoto and his family, they were going through their own bit of strife. It was rather hard for the Todoroki family to get together for a meal or anything like that. A lot of the situations that they had gone through had, well, more or less fractured the family beyond compare, and Endeavor knew fully well that he was responsible for that. However, all the same, Todoroki's older sister tried to get them all together for dinner once again. And she even asked for him to invite his friends over as well, with Izuku and Bakugo coming over to eat. The food was very good, and Endeavor would come along for the family dinner, eventually being joined by his other older brother, Natsuo. However, it didn't take very long for the disgruntled family and their rather dark and ugly past to come bearing to the forefront. Natsuo and Endeavor had clearly never seen eye to eye on many things, and Natsuo held him responsible for what had happened to their family, for losing their mother and forcing her into a hospital, for the loss of their oldest brother, as well as for scarring Shoto. Fuyumi would try to be the bearer of peace, but there wasn't much that she could do. Even though everyone had been able to gather together to eat, ultimately, Natsuo decided that he just couldn't stand it. He couldn't stand his house. He couldn't stand the dark memories, the pain that it caused everyone. Izuku and Bakugo remained quiet, trying to be respectful and staying out of others' affairs. But even ultimately, they would give their own advice on the situation. Bakugo even complimenting Fuyumi on her cooking, and there were a few things he wanted to learn from her as well. Izuku would also speak about the family's troubles, and he would even remark that despite everything that Endeavor had done, in the end, the only person who had to forgive him was them, and whether they did or didn't, that was up to them in the long run. Forgiveness wasn't something that should be expected, no matter how much Endeavor tried to change, but at the same time, he could keep an open mind about things. But it was always best to make sure that he took his time, and did what was best for him. Before leaving, Fuyumi would thank Bakugo and Izuku for being friends with her brother, while Endeavor would reflect on the loss of his eldest son, Toya. As the three were beginning to head home, along with Endeavor, who was having his driver personally take them, an incident had occurred not too long far ahead up the road. A villain by the name of Ending had kidnapped Natsuo and was holding him hostage. as Endeavor rushed over immediately in an attempt to save his son. The villain had become crazed and had been driven mad over the years, remembering how Endeavor had beaten him up swiftly and thrown him in jail. The only thing that he could remember all this time was Endeavor, and he had made his way back for only one request. He wanted Endeavor to kill him, to end his life. And if he didn't get exactly what he wanted, then Natsuo would die. Endeavor would be very conflicted at this moment, remembering of how he had killed that high-end Nomu. Ending wanted that same request, to die as the Nomu did. But Endeavor simply couldn't do it. Endeavor was starting to break, not sure of what to do in that moment. However, before he had a chance to continue on in his rampage, Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki would break away immediately, grabbing onto their morphers. They would morph into action as they went to subdue the villain as well as protect the citizens in the area. Todoroki would get his brother away from the villain as quickly as possible, while Bakugo would use his explosions to stun him. Izuku would begin to use some of Black Whip, gaining a better control over his quirk, as he grabbed onto a few of the cars that had gone off the road, keeping them from crashing or from falling over and causing even more of an accident. The three young heroes worked together in unison, protecting the others before eventually subduing the villain, using his own quirk White Line against him, binding him up and holding him in place, as Todoroki would freeze him, keeping him from escaping. Once the villain was subdued and the citizens were safe, Endeavor would once again try to speak to his son Natsuo, hoping to apologize for everything that had happened, for what had happened to Toya, for what he did to Shoto, to their mother. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but even still, even if they could never repair what was once broken, he hoped ultimately that he could eventually be someone worthy of being called father. Natsuo, on the other hand, tried to fight back through the tears. Ultimately, he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't do it right now, before eventually bidding them farewell and leaving. He thanked his younger brother for saving him and the others as well, as everyone was now preparing to go home. Eventually, though, for Endeavor, he knew what needed to be done. One day, while the children were all going to go and see their mother, having their own time, Endeavor had decided that it was time for a change. Once they were finished at the hospital, upon returning home, they saw that their things were being packed and moved immediately. Fuyumi would go to ask Endeavor what he was doing, but Endeavor would tell them that he had brought them a new home. New furniture, everything was being furnished for them. When Rei was able to get out of the hospital, they could go there, and that was where they would call home. Fuyumi would ask if he was going to be there with them, but Endeavor simply shook his head and told his eldest daughter no, explaining that if they were ever truly going to move on with their life, if they were ever truly going to find that peace, he simply could not be there. Despite her protest, Endeavor would tell her that she was a good and kind-hearted person, and that what she had done for this family would never be forgotten, but that for right now, it was just better if he stayed here with all of the bad memories, believing that if he truly loved and cared for his family, as he said, then the best thing that he could do for them was give them a new start. Whether or not he would be there, that was for them to decide, when they were ready to decide it. Natsuo wouldn't say anything, but he understood what his father meant. And this, at least, was one good way to start. Shoto was also surprised. He wasn't sure how to feel about this at the moment. Despite everything he had said to his father, he couldn't say that he outright despised everything about him. Endeavor the hero was truly amazing and extraordinary. But Endeavor the hero and Endeavor the father were two completely different people. And it would take a long time before Endeavor was a father in his eyes. But all the same, they understood what was being done here. And deep down they appreciated him for that at least. As they all moved into the new home, waiting for their mother to return, Endeavor was left alone with the bad dreams and the visions in his mind. As the heroes were gathering together, training and getting stronger for what was to come, knowing that just on the horizon, in 4 months' time, the great battle would approach them. There was one more skirmish that was to take place before them. Shigaraki had been put into a deep, trance-like state. As he held on to the broken morpher within, his mind and his subconscious found itself traveling to the darkest sides of the morphing grid. Within, he found himself separating from the positivity, from the hope, and he only looked for the destruction, for the chaos. Deep within, there was a voice that was calling out to him. A voice that if anyone else heard it, it would be a voice of pure evil. But for Shigaraki, this was a voice of comfort. As he found himself traveling in the darkness, he would see a light. It would be a flash of green, before eventually he would find himself enthralled with the power. Among this green light, there would be 6 others as well. Red, blue, yellow, black, pink, and silver. All 7 would surround him. All of the voices swirling in his mind. These voices, they all started to drive him insane. He could feel the vitriol, he could feel the hatred, the scorn from within each and every voice. Each one telling him to let it out, to not hold back, to let free his cardinal desire. Each voice pushing him, each voice speaking to his inner dark heart. This power, this was what he was looking for. The power that would let him crush his enemies. The power that would let him finally be rid of those rangers. As he reached out towards the green light, it reached back towards him, swirling him in its darkness, before eventually he would awaken. He would find himself back within the private medical facility. As the doctor would look down upon him, he would ask Shigaraki if he found what he was looking for. Shigaraki would look up to him with a wide grin as he smiled, and he told him indeed he had. He found a new power, One that would truly bring about the end of the Age of Heroes. It was time for a change with the League of Villains. It was time to get bold. It was time to get destructive. But most importantly, it was time to get a little psycho. This concludes What If Deku Was a Power Ranger? Heroes of the Morphing Grid Part 12. If you enjoyed today's video and everything else that we have on this channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is Power Core Productions and Podcasting that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned as we're going to be continuing into One Piece Rangers of the Sea Battle at Enies Lobby Part 2. And we'll be doing some more what if one-shots, discussions, and theory videos coming out later on this week and this weekend. But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with Power Core Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.